This ring costs more than your entire miserable life. The crack of Victoria's palm against 3-year-old Leo's cheek echoed through the marble foyer of the Sterling estate in Chicago. The toddler collapsed onto the polished floor, his tiny fingers clutching a worn, faded blue plush elephant with a missing button eye. He didn't even cry yet, he was frozen in sheer terror. "Get your filthy hands off me, you little rat!" Victoria shrieked, wiping her hand as if she had touched toxic waste. On her finger, a massive, 12-carat canary diamond ring caught the morning sun, throwing blinding shards of light across the room. Elena dropped her mop, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. She scrambled across the floor, pulling her trembling son into her arms, shielding him with her own body. Elena was a widow, working 14-hour shifts as a live-in maid just to afford Leo's asthma medication. This job was her survival. Leo was her entire world. "I am so sorry, Miss Victoria," Elena choked out, tears blurring her vision as she checked Leo's rapidly reddening cheek. "He didn't mean to. He was just drawn to the light." "I don't care," Victoria hissed, her eyes venomous. "Look at him. He almost scratched the stone. Do you have any idea what Julian paid for this? This is an authentic, flawless masterpiece. You could work for the Sterling family for 3 generations and you still wouldn't earn enough to look at it." Julian Sterling, the billionaire real estate mogul and Elena's employer, walked into the foyer, his brow furrowed. He was a man carrying the heavy weight of his family's legacy, still grieving the mysterious drowning of his younger sister 2 years ago, a tragedy that had left him emotionally guarded. "What is going on here?" Julian demanded, his voice deep and commanding. Victoria instantly changed, her venom melting into a fragile, victimized pout. "Julian, darling. Thank goodness you're here. This creature's child just attacked me. He tried to steal my engagement ring right off my finger. Look, I'm shaking." Elena looked up, her voice trembling but desperate. "Mr. Sterling, please, that's not what happened. Leo just touched it. He's only 3. But Julian's face remained an unreadable mask. Before he could speak, little Leo, whimpering from behind his mother's shoulder, pointed a tiny, shaking finger at the massive, glittering rock on Victoria's hand. In a quiet, innocent whisper that sliced through the tense silence of the room, the toddler said, "Glass." Victoria gasped, her face turning instantly pale, a flash of pure panic crossing her features before she masked it with rage. What happened next shocked everyone. "You deaf little brat!" Victoria roared, lunging forward as if to strike the child again. But Julian instantly stepped between them, his hand gripping Victoria's wrist with an icy firmness. "That's enough, Victoria," Julian said, his eyes narrowing as he stared at his fiancée. Why had a 3-year-old's innocent word triggered such a violent, panicked reaction from a high-society heiress? But that wasn't the real secret. "Get them out of my sight," Victoria demanded, her voice shaking as she pulled her wrist away. "Fire her, Julian. Fire her right now, or the wedding is off." Julian looked down at Elena and the sobbing little boy clutching the blue plush elephant. "Elena, take Leo to your quarters. We will discuss this later." Elena hurried down the servants' hallway, her mind racing and her hands shaking so badly she could barely open her door. She held Leo tight, rocking him. But as she tried to soothe him, she noticed something strange stuck to the velcro of Leo's plush elephant. It was a tiny, jagged fragment of something clear and sharp. It looked like a chip of glass. Or a chip of a replica stone. What Elena discovered that night changed everything. As the mansion grew quiet around midnight, Elena crept toward the kitchen to get Leo some milk. Passing Julian's private study, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, she could hear Victoria's voice, hushed and frantic, speaking to someone on her burner phone. "He's starting to look too closely at it," Victoria whispered aggressively into the receiver. The kid said something today. No, he doesn't know yet. But if Julian takes it to the family jeweler before the wedding, we are ruined. Did you get the real one shipped to the vault in Miami or not? Elena gasped, covering her mouth. The ring on Victoria's finger was a fake. But the truth was much worse. Suddenly, a heavy hand dropped onto Elena's shoulder from behind. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, only to find herself looking directly into the cold, piercing eyes of Julian Sterling. "What are you doing outside your quarters, Elena?" Julian's voice was a low, dangerous growl that vibrated through the dark hallway. Elena's knees buckled. She was trapped between a billionaire who could destroy her future in a second, and his fiancée, who was actively plotting a massive deception. If she spoke the truth right now, Julian might think she was just a disgruntled maid trying to save her job after the morning's incident. If she lied, she would become an accomplice to whatever dark game Victoria was playing. I was just getting Leo some milk, Mr. Sterling," Elena stammered, her hands trembling as she held the empty bottle like a shield. Julian's eyes drifted down to her hands, then shifted to the half-open door of his study. Victoria's muffled, frantic whispering was still barely audible. Julian didn't say another word. He simply reached out, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle, and guided Elena away from the door, pushing her further down the shadow-drenched corridor, away from Victoria's hearing. "My fiancé thinks I should fire you," Julian said, his face an impenetrable mask of stone. "She thinks your son is a liability. But I pride myself on being a fair man, Elena. Tell me what my sister's blue plush elephant is doing in your son's hands." The question hit Elena like a physical blow. The blue elephant Leo held so dearly, the one with the missing button eye, had been found in the estate's donation bin 6 months ago. Your sister's?" Elena breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It belonged to Charlotte," Julian said, a raw, agonizing flash of grief breaking through his cold exterior. "She died 2 years ago. That toy was the last thing she had before she drowned in Lake Michigan. It was supposed to be locked away in the family archives. Who gave it to you?" Nobody knew what was hidden in the history of that toy, but the realization sent a shiver down Elena's spine. "I found it in the discard bin in the basement, Mr. Sterling. I swear. Leo was having an asthma attack, and it was the only thing that calmed him down. I didn't know." "Keep it," Julian interrupted sharply, though his eyes remained intensely focused on her. "But keep your boy away from Victoria. There are things happening in this house that you do not understand." He turned and walked back toward his study, leaving Elena standing alone in the dark. Her mind was spinning. Why was Charlotte's toy in the trash? And why was Victoria so terrified of Julian looking closely at her engagement ring? The next morning, something impossible happened. Elena was assigned to clean Victoria's private dressing room while the heiress was out at a bridal fitting. The room smelled of expensive perfume and suffocating arrogance. Elena worked quickly, wanting to avoid any further conflict. But as she emptied the small velvet-lined wastebasket near Victoria's vanity, her fingers brushed against something hard. It was a crumpled piece of paper, a receipt from a high-end pawn shop in downtown Chicago. Elena smoothed out the paper, her eyes widening as she read the text. It was an emergency valuation for a 12-carat canary diamond. But at the bottom, written in red ink, was a bold stamp, "Authenticity denied, moissanite replica." And right next to it, a handwritten note from the pawnbroker. Real stone matching this serial number was flagged as stolen property from the Sterling estate insurance claim 2 years ago. Elena's breath hitched. The real diamond wasn't just swapped, it was connected to a crime committed the exact same year Julian's sister died. Before Elena could process the revelation, she heard the sharp click of high heels marching down the hallway. The dressing room door burst open. Victoria stood at the threshold, her eyes locking instantly onto the crumpled receipt in Elena's hand. The heiress's face contorted into an expression of pure, unadulterated malice. "You miserable, snooping little bitch," Victoria whispered, closing the door behind her and locking it with a heavy click. What happened next changed the stakes forever. Victoria didn't scream. Instead, she walked over to her vanity, pulled open a drawer, and snatched up a heavy, solid gold heirloom hairbrush. With a ruthless, calculated movement, Victoria smashed the hairbrush directly into her own forehead, slicing her skin open. Blood immediately began to trickle down Victoria's flawless face. She dropped the brush at Elena's feet, tore her own designer blouse, and let out a blood-curdling shriek that echoed through the entire mansion. "Julian! Help me! She's attacking me! The maid is trying to kill me!" The heavy oak door was kicked open with brutal force. Julian charged into the dressing room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild as they scanned the scene. Victoria collapsed to her knees, sobbing hysterically as blood smeared across her manicured hands. "Julian! She tried to steal my ring again. When I caught her, she struck me with the heirloom brush. She said she'd ruin me." Elena stood frozen, the crumpled pawn shop receipt still gripped tightly in her trembling fingers. "No. Mr. Sterling, she did this to herself. Look at the paper. She's lying about everything." Julian didn't look at the paper. His gaze was locked on the blood dripping from his fiancée's forehead, and then it drifted down to the gold hairbrush lying at Elena's feet. The air in the room grew suffocatingly cold. "Get out," Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Mr. Sterling, please, listen to me," Elena begged, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "I said, get out of my house, Elena." Julian roared, his control snapping. "You have 5 minutes to take your child and leave this estate before I call the police and have you arrested for aggravated assault." Victoria hid her face against Julian's chest, but as she did, she peered over his shoulder. Her sobbing instantly stopped for a split second, her eyes locking onto Elena with a look of pure, triumphant evil. She mouthed 3 words, "You are dead." Elena fled down the servants' hallway, her vision blurred by tears. She ran into her small quarters, grabbing Leo, who was quietly talking to his blue plush elephant. She packed their lives into a single battered suitcase, her heart shattering as Leo whimpered, sensing his mother's absolute panic. Julian, the man she thought was fair, had blindly chosen a monster. But what Julian didn't know was that Elena still held the pawn shop receipt crushed in her pocket. 10 minutes later, Elena was cast out into the freezing Chicago rain, pulling her suitcase with one hand and clutching Leo tightly with the other. They had nowhere to go. Her meager savings were completely depleted from buying Leo's medicine the week before. As they walked down the rain-slicked sidewalk away from the gated estate, a massive, black luxury SUV with tinted windows slowly pulled up to the curb beside them. The window rolled down. Elena braced herself, expecting Julian's security team to demand the receipt back. Instead, she found herself staring at an elderly man with sharp, intelligent eyes, dressed in a flawless bespoke suit. "Are you Elena Vance?" the man asked, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Who are you?" Elena asked, stepping back, shielding Leo from the vehicle. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," the man said, opening the car door. "I was Charlotte Sterling's personal attorney before her tragic accident 2 years ago. Get in the car, Elena. Your life, and your son's life, are in grave danger. The truth about that canary diamond is far worse than a simple insurance fraud." Elena's blood ran cold. How did this man know her name? And what did a dead girl's lawyer have to do with her? 3 hours later, inside a secluded, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, Arthur laid out a series of old photographs on the table. Elena stared at them, her breath catching in her throat. The photos showed Victoria, 2 years ago, standing next to a shady-looking man in an alleyway. But that wasn't the real shock. In Victoria's hands was the exact same blue plush elephant Leo was currently holding. Charlotte didn't drown by accident, Elena, Arthur whispered, leaning in closer. She discovered that Victoria was systematically draining the Sterling family trusts using counterfeit jewelry replicas. Charlotte was going to tell Julian the night she died. The last thing she had on her person was that blue toy. Elena looked down at Leo, who was asleep on the vinyl booth, his small arm wrapped around the elephant. But why did Leo find it in a discard bin 6 months ago? Because someone inside that house brought it back as a trophy, Arthur revealed darkly. And if Victoria realizes what is still hidden inside that toy, she will ensure you and your son disappear just like Charlotte did. Suddenly, the glass windows of the diner shattered into a million pieces as a heavy brick wrapped in paper came crashing through the front view. Screams erupted. Elena dove over Leo, protecting him as glass rained down. Arthur scrambled to his feet, pulling a hidden document from his briefcase and slamming it into Elena's hands. You need to run. Now. They found us. Elena grabbed Leo and bolted out the kitchen exit into the dark alley, her heart hammering against her ribs. Under the flickering street lamp, she unfolded the paper Arthur had given her. It was Charlotte's official, unaltered autopsy report from 2 years ago. What Elena read on that page made her knees completely give way beneath her. The rain poured over the paper, but the bold, stamped letters on the medical examiner's official report screamed through the dark. Cause of death, asphyxiation by strangulation. Charlotte hadn't drowned. She had been murdered before her body was dumped into Lake Michigan. And tucked inside the official folder was a crime scene photo of Charlotte's body, her lifeless fingers resting mere inches away from the blue plush elephant. In the photo, the toy still had both of its eyes. Elena's hands shook violently. The missing button I wasn't lost in a donation bin. It had been ripped off during a struggle. The truth was terrifying. Victoria wasn't just a thief and a liar. She was a killer. And right now, she was hours away from marrying Julian Sterling and securing absolute immunity behind the family's billions. Before Elena could even scream, the headlights of a roaring engine illuminated the alleyway. A sleek black car tore around the corner, pinning Elena and Leo against the brick wall. The door flung open, and 2 burly men in heavy coats stepped out. Hand over the toy and the paperwork, girl, and maybe your kid gets to see tomorrow, one of them growled, drawing a switchblade that glinted in the dim alley light. Elena didn't think. She clutched Leo to her chest, squeezed her eyes shut, and screamed for help into the empty, desolate street. Suddenly, the blinding high beams of another vehicle flooded the alley. Tires screeched as a massive armored SUV rammed directly into the attacker's car, sending it spinning into a row of metal trash cans. The 2 thugs scrambled back into their vehicle and fled into the night, realizing they were suddenly outmatched. Elena collapsed against the brick wall, sobbing, pulling Leo so tight he gasped. The door of the rescuing SUV opened. Stepping out into the rain, his expensive wool coat soaking through, was Julian Sterling. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed out by a mixture of shock and profound rage. Mr. Sterling. Elena whimpered, backing away in terror. Please, don't let her hurt my son. Julian stepped into the light of the flickering street lamp, and Elena saw that he was holding a small, clear evidence bag. Inside it was a matching, dark blue plastic button, the missing eye of Leo's plush elephant. I went to my sister's old bedroom after you left, Julian said, his voice cracking with an agonizing, broken emotion. I found this jammed deep into the floorboards under her old vanity. I realized Victoria had been remodeling that specific room for months. She missed it. Elena, please. Show me what Arthur gave you. With trembling hands, Elena handed Julian the altered autopsy report. As Julian read the words, his chest heaved, and a single, heavy tear mixed with the rain on his cheek. The realization hit him like a physical blow. he had been sleeping in the bed of the woman who had slaughtered his younger sister. "She used me," Julian whispered, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned stark white. "She killed Charlotte, stole the family diamonds, and now she's preparing to walk down the aisle in 12 hours. We have to go to the police." Elena cried out, her voice desperate. "No," Julian said, a terrifying, icy resolve hardening his features as he looked down at Elena and little Leo. "The police can be bought by her family's lawyers. We have one shot to destroy her completely, where she cannot hide behind her wealth. The wedding is tomorrow morning. Every major media outlet, billionaire, and investor in the country will be in that church." Julian reached out, offering his hand to the maid he had wrongfully banished just hours before. "Elena, I need your help. We are going to let her think she won. And then, we are going to strip her of everything." What happened the next morning at the altar would be talked about across the country for decades. But the final piece of evidence they needed was still hidden inside the toy, and time was running out. The morning sun broke over the spires of the Grand Chicago Cathedral, painting the stained glass windows in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Inside, over 500 of the city's elite sat in velvet pews. At the altar stood Victoria, looking like a vision in a custom lace gown, her face flawlessly healed with heavy makeup. On her finger, the massive canary diamond replacement glinted under the chandeliers. Julian stood beside her in a sharp tuxedo, his expression perfectly serene, masks hiding the storm brewing beneath his skin. "If anyone here knows a reason why these two should not be wed," the Archbishop's voice boomed through the vaulted ceiling, "let them speak now, or forever hold their peace." The heavy double doors at the back of the cathedral burst open. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Walking down the center aisle, dressed in her simple, stained maid's uniform, was Elena. In her arms, she held Leo, who was tightly clutching his blue plush elephant. "Get this garbage out of here!" Victoria's mother shrieked from the front row. Security guards instantly lunged forward to intercept Elena, but Julian raised a single, commanding hand. "Stand down," Julian ordered, his voice echoing through the microphone, freezing the guards in their tracks. Victoria's perfect smile cracked, her eyes flashing with venom as she glared at Elena. "Julian, darling, what is the meaning of this? Why is this psychotic woman here? She assaulted me yesterday." "She didn't assault you, Victoria," Julian said calmly, stepping away from the altar and walking toward Elena. "But someone did assault my sister, Charlotte, in this very city 2 years ago. Julian, you're ruining our day. She's crazy." Victoria yelled, her voice vibrating with a sudden, sharp edge of panic. Julian reached out, taking the blue plush elephant from Leo's hands. He turned to face the crowd, holding it up. "My sister died clutching this toy. For 2 years, I was told she drowned. But yesterday, I found the missing piece." Julian pulled the dark blue plastic button from his pocket and pressed it perfectly into the empty socket on the elephant's face. A perfect match. Found in the room Victoria desperately tried to remodel. "This is absurd. A toy proves nothing." Victoria laughed hysterically, backing away toward the priest. "You're having a breakdown, Julian. The toy doesn't just prove where she died, Victoria," Elena spoke up, her voice strong, echoing through the silent church. "It proves why she died." Elena reached down to the plush elephant. With a swift movement, she pulled at the loose stitching near the neck where Leo had played with it. Instead of stuffing, Elena pulled out a small, metallic silver object. It was a high-capacity encrypted flash drive, wrapped in Charlotte's own handwriting that read, "Victoria's fraud documents and wiretaps." Victoria lunged forward to grab it, her face contorting into the face of a monster, but Julian caught her by the throat, shoving her back. 2 years ago, my sister recorded you planning the diamond swap and tracking the insurance fraud, Julian whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. When she confronted you, you choked the life out of her. You threw her in the lake. And then you stepped into her place to marry me for my money. You have no proof. Victoria screamed, tears of rage ruining her makeup. At that exact moment, the massive projection screens on either side of the altar, meant to show a romantic slideshow of the couple, flickered to life. Instead of photos, a crystal-clear audio file began to play through the church's state-of-the-art sound system. It was the recording from the flash drive. If Julian finds out about the Miami vault, I'll lose everything, Victoria's recorded voice rang out, clear as day. Then, Charlotte's voice, I'm telling him tonight, Victoria. It's over. Followed by the horrific, unmistakable sound of a violent struggle, choking, and a final, chilling whisper from Victoria, nobody replaces me. The church descended into absolute chaos. High society guests stood up in horror, covering their mouths. The side doors of the cathedral slammed open, and a dozen federal agents and Chicago police officers rushed the altar. Within seconds, Victoria was thrown onto the marble steps, her hands forced behind her back as cold steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The 12-carat moissanite replica ring slipped from her finger, bouncing worthless on the floor. As they dragged her away, screaming curses at the top of her lungs, Julian fell to his knees. The heavy weight of 2 years of misplaced grief and betrayal finally broke him. He wept openly at the altar. Elena walked over, kneeling beside him, and placed a gentle, comforting hand on his shoulder. Leo stepped forward, offering his fully restored blue elephant to Julian. For you, the little boy whispered. Justice had finally been served. 1 year later, the Sterling estate was no longer a place of cold shadows and dark secrets. The gates were open, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the gardens. Julian had established the Charlotte Sterling Foundation to protect vulnerable women and children, appointing Elena as the executive director. She was no longer a maid bowing to the cruel elite, she was a leader, living a life of dignity and security, her son's health fully taken care of. True wealth wasn't measured in the clarity of a diamond, but in the truth, love, and justice that no amount of money could ever buy.